a very, very fiery campaign.
I'll make a promise that we'll continue to fight for jobs.
Congresswoman Cheri Bustos and the man she beat in 2012, former Congressman Bobby Schilling.
It did allow for me to step back. You know, I call it my 2-year break.
My enthusiasm today is as much as it was when we first announced this race, and we're ready to get going. I want to make some things happen now.
Tonight they return to the same studio they were in 2 years ago for the only debate in the 2014 election.
Your voice, your vote. The 17th Congressional District Debate, brought to you by WQAD News 8 and The Dispatch, Rock Island Argus.
And good evening. I'm Jim Mertens, your moderator for tonight's 30-minute discussion of issues concerning the 17th Congressional District in Illinois. Tonight we welcome the two candidates running for this Western Illinois district. The incumbent is Democrat Cheri Bustos. She was elected in November of 2012. Prior to her term in Congress, Mrs. Bustos worked as a newspaper reporter, worked in the healthcare industry, and served on the East Moline City Council. Cheri Bustos is married and the mother of 3 sons. And the challenger is Bobby Schilling. He served in Congress from 2011 to January 2013. Schilling is best known as the owner of a Quad City pizza business. He had worked in the insurance and investment fields and at a container company before that. Bobby Schilling is married and the father of 10 children. Tonight's debate can be seen on WQAD.com and QConline.com and will be shown nationally on C-SPAN. It's also being run on Quad City and Peoria Public Television and on WVIK, Quad City Public Radio. And expect full coverage in the Dispatch, Rock Island Argus newspapers. Plus, right now you can follow along on Twitter at #17debate and be part of the conversation. Each candidate's campaign staff agreed to some ground rules to tonight's discussion of the issues. The topics of our questions, and most of the questions themselves, come from our News 8 viewers, the readers of the Dispatch, Rock Island Argus, QC Online, and WQAD.com. Each candidate will get a minute to answer the question, with the opponent then getting 1 minute to give their views. And after that, I can ask a follow-up question to help clarify an issue. Each candidate will also get a 90-second opportunity for a closing statement at the end of tonight's program. Moments ago, we had a coin toss. The winner decides if they want the first question or the final closing remarks. The winner of the coin toss is Bobby Schilling. Mr. Schilling picked to have the last closing statement. That means Cheri Bustos has the first question tonight. And we start with the issue of jobs. We got this question from Donna in Joe Davies County, who says, Robert Shaw in Hanover just announced they are moving their jobs to Mexico. This is devastating for the town of Hanover and is also for Joe Davies County. What will you do to keep jobs in the U.S. and more specifically in Northwest Illinois?
Well, from day one, since the election, since I began to serve, jobs in the economy have been my #1 priority. And I'm very proud of the fact that we've had some success in actually bringing jobs to this area. After more than a decade of waiting, we've been able to open the Thompson Prison. We have 300 jobs on their way, another 800 next year. And this is after a decade of waiting, when previous folks serving in this role couldn't get that done. What you're talking about as far as these jobs being shipped over to Mexico have been devastating. It's a reflection of bad policy. My opponent supports tax breaks for corporations that actually send jobs overseas. It's been devastating not only to Hanover, it's been devastating to Knox County when the Maytag jobs, 2,000 of them were sent over to Mexico. To the Sensata plant in Freeport, Illinois, we had 170 jobs because of bad policy. I will work every day to make sure I'm looking after the middle-class families of this district.
Bobby Schilling, your response.
I think the key thing here to do is to take a look at truly what is the cause as to why people want to leave the United States of America. And it's really because of the overtaxation, the overregulation of the EPA, OSHA, so on and so forth. You know, the thing I found interesting is that given opportunity when I was in Congress to rein in the EPA, to give responsible regulations to good American companies so that we didn't ship them overseas, I did exactly that. My opponent, on the other hand, when I had an opportunity to rein in the EPA, was unwilling to have voted no to rein them in. The key thing is we don't want to see any jobs leave the United States. And to be very clear is, you know, it is not true. PolitiFact has determined that the tax breaks for American companies to ship jobs overseas is up on their website saying that that is not true. There is no loophole that incentivizes American companies to do that. So I think the key thing here is to make sure we've got good representation that is going to actually try to draw jobs into the United States and not scare them out through taxes and regulations.
Do you have a 30-second response?
I do. There are indeed tax breaks that my opponent supported that actually give companies incentive to ship those jobs overseas, where they actually they get a tax benefit for doing that. I've met these people who worked at Sensata. I met people who had worked there for 30 and 40 years. I know the woman who had to scrape the tape off the floor after she trained the Chinese replacements who were taking her job to get that plant ready for closure. I know these people who have been impacted by bad policy, and my opponent has supported those very policies I'm referring to.
Our second question really gets to the heart of the matter of the campaigns, and like it or not, your candidacies are being defined by your opponents and their supporters. Mrs. Bustos, you're being accused of breaking a promise to return 10% of your wages. And Mr. Schilling, you're being accused of turning your back on union workers who are losing their jobs. So we start with you, Mr. Schilling. We want to give you a chance to address these allegations.
You know, first and foremost, you know, when I made promises when I ran in 2010, I kept every single one of my promises, whether it was to reject the congressional pension, whether it was to reject the congressional health care. You know, we were the first class since the Korean War that actually spent less money than the previous Congress before us. We cut 11.4% out of our budgets, which was the right thing to do. The fact of the matter is that, you know, Ms. Bustos actually voted for a $6 billion cut to veterans. That's a fact. I mean, that's a yes or no. Did you vote to cut those? Our ads are all factual, and they're based on facts, where hers are more of the straw man, where you can pick whoever you want throughout the United States and say, well, X candidate decided he's going to ship jobs overseas, which is truly false, and PolitiFact backs that up for us.
Mrs. Bustos?
It really is a shame how these campaigns are run these days. You know, I feel for the people who have to watch these commercials time after time. My husband, in fact, refuses to watch the lower channels anymore, no offense, and goes up to the channels where he can watch Gilligan's Island and F Troop just to avoid these negative ads. There's an outside party, not partisan anyway, called factcheck.org. They check the truthfulness of ads all over the country. They have called my opponent's ads against me shamefully misleading. They have nothing to do with being a Democrat or Republican, but they do have to do with fair messaging to voters, and they've called it shamefully misleading. I'm proud of the fact that we've had a lot that we've accomplished. We're trying to spread the word about that, and that will continue to be our focus in this campaign, that we talk about our accomplishments, jobs, the economy, seniors, and veterans.
Okay, you know, wait, both of you haven't exactly answered the questions. I'm going to give you 30 seconds each on this one more time, and start with you, Mr. Schilling. You're being accused of turning your back on the union workers, that you weren't listening, a deaf ear. What do you say specifically to that? That
was at a Farm Bureau meeting where I was receiving an award, and I went in to get this award, and what happened was some folks that weren't even from the district of which I represented, they were actually all from Don Manzullo's district, came in and took over a meeting, but at no point at all did I ever turn my back. What happened is Ms. Bustos' friends took a video and cut it, and we actually have the full video out there. I tried to have several meetings with these people. I actually even wrote a letter to the president of the company. This was all decision was made back in 2010 before I was even elected to office.
And Mrs. Bustos, specifically, the 10% of giving back of your wages, how do you respond to that? And you say that you misspoke.
I made a mistake when I appeared before the Chicago Tribune editorial board, and I've acknowledged that. What I do support, and it's the exact same policy that my opponent also supports, is a collective 10% pay cut for Congress. It's the exact same policy that he supports. In addition to that, I support something that's called no budget, no pay. Congress's #1 job is to make sure that we pass a budget. And because we had the No Budget, No Pay Act hanging over saying, Congress, if you don't pass a budget, you don't get paid. We passed a bipartisan budget for the first time in many, many years.
I want to get to another area that is...
Can I get a 30-second rebuttal to that?
You both have had your 30 seconds, or else I have to do another 30. So let's end it right there, if you don't mind. I do want to move on, and we're going to start with Mrs. Bustos on this one. And it has to do with a health concern that a lot of Americans are having right now, worldwide, Ebola we're talking about. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has repeatedly warned us of the dangers of the Ebola virus. At the same time, they've told us not to panic. Your chances of infection are slim. Now, Homeland Security will start screening at airports, including O'Hare, we believe, beginning this weekend. Are you confident the government can contain the spread of the virus in the United States? And are you worried the government might violate civil liberties in the process?
Well, it's health threat that is very frightening to a lot of people. You know, I spent a lot of time out today talking to a lot of people, and I would ask people just in conversation, are you worried about this? And we have moms of little kids right here in the Quad Cities who worry about the Ebola threat. So I think we have to respond to this with a sense of urgency. We are part of, the United States is part of the World Health Organization. I've worked in healthcare. The previous 10 years of my career were in healthcare before I ran for Congress. I know when we talked about isolation units, I know how the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention alert hospitals about that. But I think this is a threat we have to take very seriously. We have to take the proper measures to make sure this is isolated and this doesn't spread any further.
Mr. Schilling, are you confident the CDC is doing what it can, and are you worried about civil liberties, that is, of Americans that could be affected?
I think they are doing what they can. I find it interesting that just 3 weeks ago the administration came out and said, look, this is never going to make it here to the United States of America. This is a major threat to this country, whether we can't afford to minimize it. You know, we've got folks that are traveling across country, across the world, and we've got to make darn sure that we do everything we can possible to make sure that this does not become a major epidemic across the United States of America. And for one thing is that we've got to proceed with caution and make sure we are screening people. I think they're taking the right steps, at the airports. That's what all the other countries do, and we're just now finally doing it. So I don't believe that they're going to violate our Fourth Amendment rights whatsoever. I think that it's a good thing that they are screening and doing everything they can to protect. That's the #1 job of the United States government, is to protect its people.
In a response, or?
Just a short one. I think the level of threat from Ebola calls out for us to take a look at these flight restrictions. I'm in favor of that if this is something that will keep this more isolated, keep it out of our country. I also think that this is one of those areas where we absolutely don't need any finger pointing. We don't need any politics attached to it. We just need to make sure that we come together, those who are leaders in the health field come together and try to tide this, the spread of this disease.
We have a number of young people, of course, that are watching this as well, or are on Twitter or all the other social media. And Mr. Schilling, we're going to start with you. This is a question from John in the Quad Cities. According to the latest numbers, the average Illinois college student owes more than $28,000 in student loan debt. What do you think needs to be done to make a college education more affordable? And do you think that this is a major threat for the next generation, the amount of college debt that they are facing?
As a father of 10 children and having kids coming out of college, this is a huge threat. The bigger threat is that kids are coming out of college and they can't find a job. What we have to do is we've got to really work hard and focus in on creating more competition for the colleges. We're seeing right here in Illinois, millions and millions of dollars being completely wasted that should have been spent a little bit more appropriately. What I believe that we have to do is we got to focus a little bit more early on with kids in college or in high school to where they can actually look and try to find a field they might want to go into. Not all children are going to go to college, so, and it's okay to have people that might be plumbers and pipe fitters and things like that, but, when you've got kids and they're going to college and it's, $50,000, $60,000 per year, that's ridiculous, and I think the competition, whether it's online or it's through, the states or the country, I think will definitely help to draw down those prices.
Mrs. Bustos.
Student loan debt is a crisis in this country. It exceeds more than $1 trillion in debt. It's exceeded what people have on their credit cards. So it absolutely needs to be dealt with. My husband and I have 3 sons, all 3 very different circumstances. Our oldest son is a graduate of a 4-year public university. Middle son went to a 4-year liberal arts school. Youngest son, a community college graduate, and I'm proud to say is gainfully employed as a welder. So we got all the way up from an engineering major to a welder, and then my middle son now is getting his MBA. He doesn't want me to mention the amount of his debt, but let me say it is in the high, 6 figures. I'm sorry, high 5 figures. It is a large debt, and so we can understand it firsthand. I have supported legislation that allows students to refinance their student loans at a lower level. I have been a lead sponsor of legislation that actually expands Pell Grants, so those students who can't go to school because they can't afford it, gives them an opportunity to do that.
Mr. Schilling, any response?
I think the key thing is that a lot of this all focuses in on the economy, and if kids go to college, they're really very concerned about what their payments are going to be when they get out, but the bigger threat that they have is in a downturn economy and no jobs out there for them to pay those payments.
All right. We want to turn to the world scene right now.
Okay.
Yesterday, a Pentagon spokesman said airstrikes won't be enough to stop ISIS from moving in and taking over a key Syrian city, Kobani, as you well know. Do you think sending American ground troops is inevitable to stop ISIS? Mrs. Bustos.
One of the last votes I cast before we came home to Illinois was actually to allow for funding for the Syrian rebels to be trained and ready to fight this on the ground. On top of that, simultaneously, we've been doing these airstrikes. My hope and the way I look at any kind of foreign policy issue, is that, number one, we start with diplomacy. If we can't be successful with that we look for sanctions. If we can't be successful on that, then let's take a look at what we might have to do militarily. I just brought in the Secretary of the Army right here in the Quad Cities and sat down with him in an intimate setting so I could be briefed on what's going on in ISIS. I've sat down in classified briefings so I know what's going on in ISIS. Before I would approve anything, I can tell you I will turn to those generals who are on the ground for their advice.
We're talking about possibility of ground troops to fight ISIS, American ground troops. Mr. Schilling, what do you think?
You know, I think that what's happened over the course of the last few months is that there have been generals that have said that we need to go after ISIS. If you recall, just a few months back, you know, we were told that ISIS was a JV team. There were nothing to worry about. And now what we're doing is we're lobbing bombs every once in a while, and it looks good on a video showing an empty building getting blown up or a truck going down the road. But the fact of the matter is ISIS is still moving forward. They are still capturing different towns in Iraq. As the father of a young man that serves in the United States Army, I believe you have to expire every way and mean possible to make sure we don't put boots on the ground, try to do whatever you can to avoid that. But the experts are all coming out saying that inevitably we will have to have boots on the ground. And what's nice is the fact that when I go and I look at something like that and having skin in the game, having a son that could be boot on the ground, we're going to really take a good hard look at that before we send our son or other sons and daughters into war.
Mrs. Bustos?
We're a war-weary country. We've been in Afghanistan and Iraq for more than 10 years. I'm very proud of the fact that on our staff, our chief of staff is a boots-on-the-ground combat veteran. She served 2 tours in Iraq. I'm very proud of the fact that we have a wounded warrior on our staff who handles our veterans issues legislatively, and that the person who oversees all of our Illinois offices served 14 years in the National Guard. So I can tell you I take these questions very seriously. Again, I would turn to those who know this best before I would make any kind of decision on what we're talking about here.
We have an interesting question coming from Rock Island. We picked it only because it is kind of an area of terrorism that isn't given much thought right now. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Schilling. This is coming from Steve in Rock Island, who says an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP attack on the USA, is relatively easy to accomplish. It would destroy our entire national electric grid. Refrigeration, internet banking, adequate food, water supply all depend on electricity. Why hasn't Congress acted to provide specific defenses against this threat?
You know, sitting on the House Armed Services Committee, this is one of the major threats that we had on committee, and this is a major threat to the United States of America. You know, what happens is when you go in and you start talking about different threats all over the board, you know, you have too many people that don't believe that this is factual. This is factual, it is real, and we need to make darn sure that we do everything. You know, and some people worry about spending money on things like this, but this is the right thing to do to make darn sure that we're defending and protecting our areas. I mean, this is major stuff that could cause people to not have water, not be able to get groceries at the grocery store. This could be very detrimental to the United States of America, and we have to make sure we have people in Congress that are moving forward to make sure that these are very, very well protected.
Mrs. Bustos?
Well, we do have experts who are looking at this, but I would approach this again no differently than what we've been talking about, whether it be a world health threat, as we're talking about with Ebola, whether it would be the threat that ISIS presents. What you do is you talk to the people who are best at this. It is indeed, it possibly could be a threat, but we have to rely on those who are best at this to make sure that they handle it. You know, my profession, you mentioned a little bit in the opener here, but I was an investigative reporter, and I did that. I was a reporter for a number of years, and how I approached my job then is in some ways very similar to how I approach my job now. I do the best I can to learn the most I can from the best experts. And I have a full understanding that there's not one side of a story, or two sides of the story, but multiple sides of the story. And in a case like this, I'm certainly no expert at the grid, but I would certainly go to the right people before I would cast a vote on deciding what we need to do.
Anything else you want to add on this topic?
You know, this is just something to where we can talk and look and think about all we want, but the fact of the matter is we've got to move on. It is very important. It's just like the veterans bill that I knew was a bad deal for our veterans. I put a bill together, and instead of just talking about it and talking to experts and all that, I actually put a bill together that would actually allow for veterans to go to any doctor or hospital across the United States of America. You know, enough of the talk. What we've got to do is we've got to defend freedom, the United States of America. We can talk to all the experts we want, but we've got to get something done about this.
Let's talk about Congress. As we start to close this debate, and we're starting with you, Sherry Bustos. Congress is to face more fiscal cliffs in the coming months. Do you support an increase in the debt limit, and should sequestration cuts be permanent?
My very first act in Congress, my very first bill that I introduced it attacked government waste and abuse. And not in a small way. It identified $200 billion in wasteful government spending. I think that's the place we need to start before we do anything. My opponent voted not once but twice to end the Medicare guarantee. So that's looking at balancing the budget on the backs of seniors, in my opinion, where it would cost seniors each $6,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. That's not the way we need to attack the budget problems that we have. On top of that, sequestration is a very, very dangerous place to go. My opponent voted for that. Here's why. That impacted this economy right here in this area by $100 million. We had workers out at our arsenal who had to take paychecks home that were less than they're used to taking home, who their take-home pay was worse. They had to take time off, forced time off, and that's the vote that he cast for our #1 employer in this area.
Mr. Schilling?
You know, I find this very interesting because the Congresswoman went to Washington, D.C., said that she was going to end the gridlock, the dysfunction, and the very first opportunity that she got, she voted no on all 6 budgets. And, you know, when you go to Congress, you've got to be able to compromise. Our Congress never had a government shutdown. And the thing is that the big difference between the two of us is when I made promises to the people of the district, I kept every single one of them. The incumbent Congresswoman had promised to forego her pay during the government shutdown. We did some research and found out that she didn't do that. I think the key thing, what we have to do at all costs, is to try to avoid sequestration. There is so much waste out there that we could go and capture, and we don't need to go in and start cutting our military so far back to where we can't defend our freedom of the United States of America.
And you get 30 seconds.
Shamefully misleading, but let me address the budget. First of all, I voted in favor of the first bipartisan budget agreement in many, many years. It was Democrats, it was Paul Ryan, and it was Patty Murray, Democrat and Republican, coming together that came up with this budget. That's the budget I voted for. It's the one that took a look after seniors in a much better way than any of the budgets I voted no on. Again, to support something like sequestration, where it impacted our community right here and the people who work right over at that island to the tune of $100 million, that's an unforgivable vote, in my opinion.
That is the end of our questions, and believe it or not, the end of our time that we're able to talk to you, but we do have 90 seconds for each of you to make a closing statement to the viewers and to the potential voters. We start with you, Mrs. Bustos.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. You handled this very honorably, and I appreciate that. And thanks most of all to our viewers at home, not only just for tuning in, but also for being engaged. This election is a question of priorities. I want to continue to fight for the middle-class families that so deserve someone there to fight for them. My opponent, on the other hand, he and his allies support tax breaks that ship our jobs overseas at a time when we need to be fighting for middle-class families. They're mixed-up priorities. I want to continue to make sure that I fight for those who are on Medicare and Social Security, including my mom. I want to fight for the right priorities for this district, and I will continue to do that. Sure, we have to make sure that we address the budget deficit. It's why my very first act in Congress, as I've talked about before, was to attack government waste and abuse. I also know that the right priorities include what I've been able to fight for this district and have been able to deliver for this district. I think this is a matter of finding solutions, finding common sense solutions, and getting results. That's why I worked with Democrats and Republicans to make sure that we passed a long-term farm bill to give our family farmers certainty. It's why I worked as hard as I could to fight off very blatantly partisan attempts to prevent the opening of the Thompson prison. And I'm proud to say that we have 1,100 jobs on their way after more than a decade of waiting. And I'm proud of our office, where we've worked with countless veterans to work through the red tape. I'm Sherry Bustos, and I'm asking you to stand with me and to vote for me, because Illinois is worth fighting for.
Thank you, Mrs. Bustos. Mr. Schilling, your closing statement.
First, I just want to thank all of the viewers out there tonight. And, you know, the question I have for each and every one of you is, how many of you out there watching tonight believe that you had it better than your parents? The scarier question is this, is how many of you out there tonight viewing believe that your kids or your grandkids are going to have it better than you? Look, I was born and raised in the west end of Rock Island. My dad worked 2 jobs. He was a bartender. But he told us if we worked hard, played by the rules, we could succeed here in America. Christy and I run a pizza store here in Moline, Illinois. We watch every single penny we spend. And we're raising our 10 children in the middle class. Now that's the American dream, and what I want to be able to do is pass that on to future generations. What we're passing on right now is not working. I want to give hope to the people out there that aren't looking for career politicians or somebody that's been appointed or anointed in. We want people that are going to be citizen legislators, people that are going to be statesmen, not career politicians. The one thing that Dad taught us as kids is work hard, play by the rules, you're going to get ahead. If you look at our district, when I went to Congress, I cut my own budget by 11.4%. On top of that, I returned $110,000 to the taxpayer. I rejected the pension. I rejected the health care. I slept on my own couch. I believe our greatest days are ahead of us here in America, and if we all work together, not to have this partisan politics going on, Democrat, Republican fighting, but coming together as Americans and do the right thing so future generations can also live the American dream that was handed on to us. Thank you.
Well, we'd like to thank Sherry Bustos and her campaign, and Bobby Schilling and his campaign for helping us out and agreeing to tonight's debate. We encourage all voters in the 17th Congressional District to cast their ballots either through early voting or on Election Day. On behalf of WQAD News 8 and the Rock Island Argus Dispatch newspapers, thank you for joining us for tonight's discussion, and have a great night. Thank you.
We'll have